Welcome and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Rausch. I am your own personal sales maven here to offer you tips, strategies, and techniques to master your communication skills. Now, you might have noticed that's a little bit different than my standard opener where I talk about sales. And that's because today's topic is really for anybody who wants to be a better communicator. That is what this show is about. And so the topic today is offering you some real simple shifts that instantly boost your likability. And this comes from my background in neurolinguistic programming. If you haven't heard me talk about that before, I have a pretty extensive background in NLP, and I really got curious about NLP because I was in a pretty high pressure sales position and I wanted to really up my game. And so I got interested in NLP and I started studying it thinking, oh, it's going to help me in sales. And it turned out it definitely helped me in sales. And it really improved my overall communication skills, which in turn improved many of the relationships in my life. And so it's kind of all of who I am now. It shows up like I don't a lot of times even think about this NLP strategy here, this NLP technique. It's just how I communicate. And the reason this episode is really live, I love to give credit where credit is due, is that I was having a meeting the other day with three brilliant women who I've known for many years, some longer than others, and they were sharing. None of them are in sales, really kind of in any component of the work that they do, but they were sharing different techniques that they use that they've learned from me over the years and how, one was talking about how it shows up when she's having a conflict with her husband, and somebody else had talked about how it shows up in just the way that she communicates with her family and with her friends. And the third person was talking about all the different just ways that she's tweaked her language and when she's communicating. So they had encouraged me to do an episode for anybody who wants to be a better communicator. So that's what this is for. And I will say, of course, because I can't help myself with the sales component, that of course these strategies will work in your client interactions or prospective clients even. So ultimately, all of these things help you grow your business and grow your relationships. So that's where we're going. Now, why is this even important when you think about why do I really need to think about likability and how this, plays into my relationships? Well, you may have heard this term before, this saying, people buy from people they know, like, and trust. Now, that's very sales focused. And the thing is when you know, like, and trust somebody, you're so much more open to hearing what they have to say, to spending time with them, communicating with them. And what does that translate into? That translates into influence. And the better of a communicator you are, the more influence you have in given situations and in relationships. So if you want to increase your influence, you got to learn how to increase your communication skills, therefore likability and how this translates. So from an NLP standpoint, likability really isn't just a personality trait. It's something that enhances the way you show up in a conversation. It enhances what you say and, of course, how you say it and how you leave people feeling. You may have heard me give this presupposition before. This comes from my NLP training. There's a presupposition that says the meaning of your communication is based on the response you get. Now, there's a lot of responsibility as the communicator when you really embody that statement, when you start taking responsibility for how people react and respond to the way you communicate with them. Now, I get pushback on that. And I will say that when I learned this, I felt like pushing back too, because I was like, some people are just hard to get along with. And some people take things the wrong way. And some people take things out of context. Yes, I acknowledge that may be the case. However, if you will take a step back and say, I'm really going to embody this, I'm going to start taking responsibility for and say the meaning of my communication is based on the response I get. So, how people respond to me, now you've got some control, which I don't know about you. I like a little control. So, if you want to have a little control in your life, in a positive way. So this isn't about being manipulative. This is about having a positive influence and increasing your influence. Then you start taking responsibility for how you interact with people. So I think about likability as rapport in action. When I think about the things that I teach, it's always based on rapport. So I say, relationship first, rapport always. And that's the foundation. So if you're thinking about your likability, it does then say, what actions are you taking to build rapport? So I have 3 tips to increase likability, and I'll talk about each one. And I'm just going to say right from the get-go that my suggestion is, if there's one that piques your interest, or if there's one that you go, well, I'm already really good at that, well, then try one of the others. But if you're willing to listen to this full episode, if you're willing to commit to yourself that I'm going to take some action on at least one of these and see, does this work? I love for people to test my work and test the strategies and the techniques that I give. I'm always delighted when somebody comes back surprised that, oh my gosh, Nikki, that really worked. I just had this conversation with a brand new client the other day. She listed, like, in our strategy session, I think 3 or 4 different things that she had implemented before we even had our first strategy session. So she was going through my training center and going through these trainings, and she's like, and this thing worked. But she said it like it was so shocking, which I have to say delights me to no end when people are shocked by these things. So commit. That's my suggestion. And you get to take whatever action you want here. But if you'll commit to one of these and see what does it do for your likability and the relationships and the communication that you're having. All right. So the first one is to really learn how important it is to acknowledge people. Now, let me stick with me because that might feel like superficial, but it isn't. It's this idea of we all like to be seen, and we all like to know that people like acknowledge that we're here, that we matter in some way. And this can show up in a lot of different instances. So I'll talk about, the good and the bad here for all 3 of these. This idea of acknowledging people, if you're seeing somebody or meeting somebody for the first time, show up from this place of delight, because isn't it so great when you meet somebody for the first time and they seem delighted to meet you? Now, this isn't about being fake. This is about committing that when you're meeting somebody for the first time, let a little bit of delight come through and make sure you acknowledge them. Learn their name. So when I talk about acknowledging, it could just be making eye contact, right? Like, eye contact is a really great way to acknowledge people. I will say that I had to learn this the hard way. So I grew up in Idaho, Boise, Idaho. And when I grew up in Boise, Idaho, it was considered kind of a medium-sized town. It definitely wasn't a city. It's much, much bigger now. And now I would say it's a small city, but it was like a medium-sized town growing up here. And the people in Idaho, and especially kind of where I grew up, is that you didn't walk by somebody on the street or even in the grocery store and not make eye contact and at least give them a nod or a smile or even a hello. Now, in the early 90s, when I moved to the Seattle area, I took this like attitude with me. And I don't know if you've ever heard about the Seattle freeze before. It's there's been articles about it that in Seattle there's this idea that, people are kind of nice superficially, but they're not interested in like knowing their neighbors. They didn't want to like know their neighbors. So when I moved there in the early 90s, and I would be walking down the street and I would smile and say hello, or I would acknowledge somebody in some way, like, I see you. And people used to stop and be like, like really confused by this. Do we know each other? And I'd be like, no. They're like, well, why are you saying hi to me? And they were very confused by it. So I will say I had to tamp it down a little bit. And over the years, I got to the place where I didn't try to get to know my neighbors either when I lived there for, 27 some years. I didn't go out of my way to get to know people in like from a neighborly standpoint because it just didn't feel like they wanted to be acknowledged. So take your cues from the other person. And if that kind of puts people off, then of course, like tamp it down. But there is something about when somebody acknowledges you and when they show a little bit of delight to see you. Now, here's the what not to do kind of with this is I recently came back from a conference and I was a speaker there. And when I came off stage, there was quite a few people who waited to speak to me. And, I'm not trying to like rush people through. So I want to take my time, but I also know that people are standing there and they're waiting. So even though I'm talking to one person, I'm still making eye contact and smiling. And then when the person I'm done, they get their question answered and then they walk away and the next person steps up like it's their turn to ask me a question. Every single person I would still say like, hi, I'm Nikki, to show this, like, I'm delighted that you're here and that you have a question for me because that person waited to speak to me. So I'm not going to assume or, act as if like, well, of course, you know who I am because I was just on stage, which, you can have that attitude, but why? How does that serve you? How does that build any kind of rapport with the other person? So this is me showing a little bit of delight. Now I am legitimately delighted. There's no fakeness to this. I'm like delighted that somebody would stay after and ask me questions. As a matter of fact, I stood there for an hour and answered questions after having taught an hour and a half workshop. It was fantastic. I loved every second of it and I was so grateful for it. Now, I also got to be a participant at this conference. And there was one speaker in particular that had a very interesting presentation. And throughout the presentation did what I often, encourage people to do, like dropped some little planting seeds about this program that she had. And so I was very interested because you couldn't sell from the stage, right? There was no selling from the stage. And there was some pretty strict guidelines about what you were allowed to do. And so I waited afterwards to talk to her because I wanted to know about her program. I wanted to know the pricing and I wanted to sign up if it was something that I could afford. So I was standing there actually with somebody that I know who also wanted to talk to the speaker. And she never looked up from the person that she was talking to. She just stood there and talked to the one person, never looked around. And there was probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 10 of us waiting to chat. So I waited for quite a while. And then the person I was standing there kind of with, we decided like, we need to get to this next like session. So because we needed to go, we thought, oh, well, we'll look for her another time to ask her because the person I was with was also interested in her program. Now, turned out a couple hours later, we saw her standing off to the side. She wasn't presenting or anything, and she was having a conversation with somebody. So we went up and we stood there. We didn't interrupt. We waited and we waited. And then we waited some more. And after waiting about 10 minutes with her never having even acknowledged that we were standing there, and it's not like I was standing behind her. I was definitely in her line of sight, never once made eye contact, sending the message, I don't see you. I don't acknowledge you in any way, which that was the end for me after about 10 minutes of standing there and not even being acknowledged at all. I was like, I actually don't care what her program is and I don't care what her pricing is because I vote with my wallet. I do not give money to people who I feel like I don't even think she would appreciate it. And I'm sure she's fantastic. She was a great speaker. But it was this like, I don't see you. And that is never the impression that you want to leave people with. Even when you're on Zoom with people, they should still feel acknowledged. They should still feel seen. somebody commented recently, I did this live coaching call, and I invited people from my email list. So even if you weren't a paying client, there was an opportunity to come and be on this coaching call with me and ask me a question. And it was a way for, people who had kind of been following and participating. And I want to, again, acknowledge people, would come and ask these questions. And there were some of my clients were also on this call too. And somebody was sending me this private message because every time it was that and people would raise their hand. It was like, raise your hand in Zoom. And then I would call on the person. But one of the ways that I acknowledge people is I want to know how to say their name. So you won't find me being the person that's like, oh, I'm not good with names. So you there in the pink scarf, right? Like I would never, ever treat somebody like that. I always say, I want to make sure that I say your name properly. And so would you help me? Would you say your name for me so that I can learn it? That is a way to acknowledge somebody because names matter. Let people know you see them and that you care about them. So that's my first tip of increasing likability. It was so great to get some feedback from one of my clients that was on the call sending me private messages of I really appreciate, Nikki, how you do that. And this is not like pat me on the back. This is me sharing techniques and strategies with you that work to increase your likability because I don't know. I don't think I'll ever be a big enough deal that I would ever want anybody to feel not seen by me. Not that I think I don't think I'm a big deal at all anyway, but sometimes other people who've listened to me for a while, or maybe they just found me and I said something and they go, I really like this lady. I'm interested in her and I'm interested in knowing her a little bit more. And so sometimes they show up like, oh, I'm so happy to talk to you, which of course, believe me, I feel just as happy, if not more, to talk to you and that you even want to talk to me. Like, I never want to send the message of I'm too big for someone else. That is such a turnoff to me. And it's a turnoff to most people. And I'm not saying that you're acting this way in any way. I'm just saying, acknowledge people. Let people know you see them and that they matter to you. And it doesn't take much. It takes you introducing yourself and saying your name. It takes you showing a little bit of delight in having this time with somebody. And it takes you being willing to learn their name and say their name properly, no matter how hard of a name it is to say. One of the biggest companies that I ever worked for was a Japanese company. And so a lot of the kind of higher ups, but also people that would come in to our group and, have supporting roles came from Japan. And they would always give them an American name, which is fine if that's what their preferred was. But to me, it was always but let's actually learn your real name. If you want to be called your real name, you don't have to go by Bob or Harry if your name is not that. So be willing to extend yourself and learn somebody's name, even if it's hard for you to say. And even if you blunder it a little bit, just show humility and that you truly want to learn. And most people will help you with that. And they'll probably be surprised that you're willing to learn a name that isn't easy for you to say. Okay, here's the second tip. And it has to do with your rate of speech. Now, this is a NLP technique that's known as matching and mirroring. And it's just one way to match and mirror people, but it has to do with your rate of speech. And I always say your rate of speech is on a spectrum, right? Where you fall on the spectrum. So imagine somebody who's a really slow talker, on a spectrum of 0 to 10 is probably down in the 3 when they speak slow. They have a thought, they think about it, and then they say it, right? A little bit of a slower rate of speech. And then, on the opposite side of the spectrum are the people who talk really, really fast. That's me, by the way. And sometimes we don't even take breaths between our sentences. We have so much to say and we're so excited to be talking that it can be hard for people to follow along when they have a different rate of speech than you. So the technique that I teach is to pay attention to the other person's rate of speech and be willing to either slow down a little bit to make it easier for them to stay in conversation with you or speed up a little bit if you need to. And the thing about matching and mirroring as a technique in NLP, you don't have to match and mirror 100%. As a matter of fact, you only match and mirror about 50 to 60%. So if they're at a 3 and you're at a 8, you really only have to get down to like a 5 or a 5.5. Just slow down a little bit. And what will happen oftentimes when you show that you're willing to adjust to the other person, they will then make some adjustments and you guys will find some middle ground in the conversation. Now, the thing about rate of speech and why this is such a great way to increase your likability is, I don't know if you, well, you tell me if this resonates with you, but when you meet somebody for the first time and you just feel like the conversation flows and it's easy and you kind of think to yourself, like, I know we just met, but I feel like we've known each other forever and I just feel really connected to this person. There's a really good chance that that connection, if you really like break it down into what are those things that are appealing to you and like bringing that likability, rate of speech is probably one of them. And so this is a really easy way to increase your likability, to show some flexibility in your approach to put the other person at ease. And the thing about when we meet somebody that we're like, oh, just being in conversation with them is so easy. And sometimes, you know, you can think you've been talking for 10 or 15 minutes and you look down and like an hour and a half has gone by and you're like, where did the time go? Right? It's just been so easy to be in conversation with this person. Now, the flip side of that is you meet somebody who has a very different rate of speech than you, and it can be hard to be in conversation. Because if you're somebody who's a slower talker and you have thoughts and then you think about them and then you say them, for those of us who like have a thought and it just comes like right out of our mouth, we tend to interrupt. We step on your thoughts. We step on the things you're going to say. And that is a huge rapport breaker. So be willing to adjust your style to the other person and see what happens. Chances are they'll be more likely to want to be in conversation with you. They'll be more interested in hearing what you have to say because it's easy. We like people who are like us. And here's the kicker. Have you noticed that when you meet somebody who's like you, who behaves like you, who thinks like you, something about them just feels familiar, you think that person is smart? Be honest. When you meet somebody who's like you and you think, wow, that person and I, like we think alike, we act alike, we have so many things in common, that person's smart. Don't we like to be around smart people? Because we know we're smart people, right? We like to be around smart people. We like to be around people who are like us. So be willing to make some adjustments. And again, this isn't about being fake. It's about adjusting to the other person to make it more comfortable for them. And notice I'm not saying we're not mimicking them. We're not mimicking their rate of speech. We're just slowing down or speeding up a little bit to make it more comfortable for them. It's just like if somebody comes over to your home, chances are you like pick up a little bit, but if nobody was coming, you might not pick up a little bit. You might not have like put all the dishes in the dishwasher, or you might not have vacuumed, but then they come over and, you know, you play the good host or hostess and you offer them, you know, a seat, and maybe you offer them a refreshment, and maybe you even put out some snacks that your family's like, how come we don't get those snacks? And they're like, because you live here, right? Like you make some concessions, you extend yourself in some way. And that's what you're doing when you match somebody's rate of speech. It's not about being fake. It's about making the other person feel comfortable and welcome. So that's a good one to try. And the reason I love this one so much is because you can use it when you're on a phone call with somebody. You can use it on Zoom, and you can definitely use it in person with somebody. You can match somebody's rate of speech. And I always recommend, if you don't know what your rate of speech is, if you're not sure, like, I don't know where I fall on the spectrum, go listen to your voicemail, because your voicemail is an indicator of your normal rate of speech. And so go, am I a fast talker? Am I a slow talker? And whatever you are is perfect. It's just learning how to add some flexibility to put the other person at ease. So do you need to learn to slow down a little bit, or do you need to learn to speed up a little bit? Years ago in an NLP class, our assistant, this is when I was a student, our assistant in that class was this cool guy, and he was in the world of finance, and he sold some pretty, like, he worked with a lot of really high wealth individuals. And I remember him coming back to class one day and telling this story about how he got on this he got on this call with somebody, and this guy was from the East Coast, so he's a very fast talker. And he got on a call with somebody that was from the South, had a little bit of a drawl, a little bit of a slower pace. And he said, normally he would have just like barreled through and like been, just this is me, take it or leave it. But he ended up slowing down just to make it more comfortable for the other person. And he said in class, he reported that that particular person said, I don't know what it is about you, but I feel really comfortable. Let's work together. And this guy ended up making this huge investment with our assistant. And it was the biggest deal he had ever closed on a first time call with somebody. And he was like, this rate of speech thing, it works. And I have many of those, my own stories too, but I'll never forget that story of, I was almost going to say his name, but I won't say his name. I'll just call him Jay. So I almost wanted to it was like, oh man, this works. And it's so impactful and it makes such a difference. Now, again, that's a kind of a sales story that I'm telling you, but it works. It works whether you're talking to your kids, whether you're talking to your spouse, whether you're talking to somebody that you just want to build relationship with and see what happens. Okay. Now here's my third tip. If you have ever done any work with me, you're going to go, this is very Nikki. It is. It's learning how to ask questions. Instead of just make statements to people, ask questions. This increases your likability because it allows for the other person in the conversation to be the expert, to have the stage, for the sun to shine on them. You don't always have to be the person who's on stage dancing around and like trying to get all of the attention in the conversation or in the relationship. So learn how to ask really good questions. Now, I teach questions and the importance of them in the sales component or in the sales training and in your personal lives. If you want to be a better communicator and if you want to increase your likability, start asking people questions. You can ask them questions like, how did you do XYZ? Insert whatever you want there. How did you do that? Be curious. Or you could say, what was it like when you were doing this or doing that? What was that like for you? Now, ask it from a place of curiosity. And this is important, right? And what you do with your voice here, because if you're like, what was that like? Then the person feels like, I feel like I'm being judged now. I might not want to share that, or I might feel like that's too pointed. But when you say like, what was that like with curiosity, people are going to be, ready to like dive in and tell you. I was listening to a podcast I listen to I listen to it twice a week because I have 2 episodes. And this particular podcaster is a longtime journalist, had a ton of success in her career. She's absolutely amazing. I will say, I find her to be really interesting. She's a great interviewer. And yet there was an interview that she was doing probably sometime last year. And the person that she was interviewing was kind of getting a little bit prickly about the way the interviewer, the podcaster in this particular case, the way that she was framing her questions. She was saying like, tell me about this, say more about that. And the interviewee was getting a little prickly and even kind of said like, I don't know that I like the way you just said that to me. Now, this is how the interviewer, like this is her style, right? This is who she is. She's made a ton of money. She's built a very amazing business and she's very well known in her field and what she's done. She's very accomplished, right? All these things. And all I could think about was, man, if she would just adjust her style a little bit for this particular person, the interview would be so much more comfortable. It felt a little awkward as the listener to listen. It felt a little awkward because it just felt like the interviewee is like, it's almost like you could see, even though I couldn't see her, it's like you could see the hair on the back of her neck standing up or the hair on her arm standing up being like, oh, I do not like this at all. And I just kept thinking like, oh man, if she would just change her questions a little bit and say, like, would you be willing to share about that? Or would you be willing to say a little bit more? Or would you share with the audience a little bit more? Like the would you would have gone so much further than the like, tell me this, say this, and the person was like, I don't like being talked to like that. So in certain situations, if you're willing to ask questions, but ask them in a way that lands softly to the other person, again, you're going to increase your likability. I would be willing to bet that it wasn't a great experience for either of them. I kind of wonder, like, what was the conversation when they both got off that podcast? Did they turn to somebody and say, like, what a jerk? Like, both of them? It just felt like neither of them enjoyed the experience. And I will say, as a listener, it's my least favorite episode I've ever listened to because it was so awkward. So ask questions, but ask them in a kind way. Another question I'll give you here is like, what if you ask somebody like, what was your biggest takeaway from, the thing that you just did last month? Or what was your biggest takeaway from the vacation that you and your family just went on? Or what has been your biggest takeaway from this time that we spent together? Like just ask questions. Let the other person participate in the conversation. You will find that people are like, I don't know, but it's just so easy to be around you because they're getting to share. It's not comfortable to go and have lunch with a friend and leave and feel like they didn't ask me one question or they didn't really like, did I even need to be there for that? Now, just being really candid here, years ago, I was meeting up with somebody who I worked with a long time ago and we'd stayed friends and stayed connected. And she had moved to another state and I was traveling for work. And so I had an open night in the city that she lived in. So we agreed to meet for dinner. And she had started asking me about what the last couple years had been like and asking me about my job. And, she was just asking me all these questions. And I was just answering. And then she said in a little bit of a soft voice, and I'll never forget this, and I actually teach this question now. She said, Nikki, would you be interested in hearing anything about my life? Now, she said it in a nice way. I will say I felt like about an inch tall because I was like, of course I'm interested in her and her life. And it was a big wake up call for me to go like, Nikki, you know better and you can do better. And nobody should ever have to ask you that question. I should have done better in that conversation. It was such a big wake up call. And so now I teach people, like, because people often say to me, like, nobody's asking me questions and they're just talking the whole time. And I say, well, here's a question. And I remember it from this friend of mine who asked me. And again, I felt a little, I feel a little ashamed sharing this story with you now. Like, I feel a little ashamed of myself, but it was a great lesson, right? To remember, like, I shouldn't just be talking about myself the whole time, even if the person says, or is just asking me questions. Like I could sit there and go, well, that's your fault because you were asking me all the questions. But if I take a step back and apply the presupposition that I mentioned before, the meaning of your communication is based on the response you get. The response I got there was I was coming off a little bit like too big for my britches. I was coming off a little bit of like, I'm more important than you. I was coming off like she didn't matter as much as me. Her life wasn't as interesting as mine. And of course, none of those things are true, but the meaning of my communication is based on the response I got. And that response let me know like, oh, check yourself. What's the saying? Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Like, oh, I got to do better. So I try to do better. And if you found yourself in those situations, like try to do better. And if you find yourself in a situation where you feel like the other person is just talking about themselves the whole time, you might ask this question and see how they respond. I will say I have asked this question of other people before. As a matter of fact, somebody in particular comes to mind where they will often say, oh, yes, and then they'll ask me a question or want me to share about something. And as soon as I start talking about it, it's like they take the mic back and start talking about themselves. And then I just sit back and wait. And then they'll go like, oh, what were you going to say? And then maybe I'll say a little bit more and then they'll take it back and start talking about themselves. Now, This is somebody who I do like. I care about this person, but I don't really want to spend a lot of time with them because it feels very one-sided in the relationship. It's very one-sided. And it's kind of like I'm second fiddle. I don't matter. That's how it feels, right? And I don't want to leave people feeling that way. And I suspect you don't either. So ask questions. And then when you ask the question, be willing to zip it and listen. It's hard to not like want to share your experience and your story when you ask somebody a question, but let them share theirs first, at least, right? Try not to interrupt and go like, "Oh, I know what you mean, and here's how that applies to my life," right? Like let them talk and see what happens. And then here's the last thing that I will leave you with as far as increasing your likability is ask yourself, how are you leaving this person? How are you leaving the interaction? Are you leaving them in a better place than you found them, or at least in as good of a place as you found them? So you want to anchor some kind of positive emotion. So I know I said I was going to give you 3 tips. Technically, this is the 4th tip, but what can you do to end the conversation to leave them feeling really good about it? One of the ways that I do this is I show up from a place of real gratitude and thank them, sometimes probably profusely. Thank them for their time. Thank you for their, the attention. Thank you for the relationship that we have. Thank you for the friendship we have, whatever it is. Like, I really want to give thanks to them for their time so that they leave feeling really good, hopefully, or at least in some way leave feeling good about that interaction that we had. This actually comes years ago when I was young. Somebody who I cared about very deeply, who was a very important person in my life. I lost this person very young. And the last couple times that I saw the person, they were so busy and they were like running to like go to work, and I was coming home from school and didn't really feel like I ever got to tell this person, oh boy, this brings up some emotion, how much this person meant to me, how important they were in my life, the impact that they made. And it just still to this day, obviously brings up some emotion that I didn't get to tell them. And so I really try to make a point now of telling people. It's been a great lesson to try to acknowledge people in some way, even, whether it's somebody I see every day, like obviously the most important person in my life, my partner, my significant other, I tell him often how much he means and how much I appreciate the things that he does, because we don't know, right? Like, if we're going to get to see the person again, you never know. Like, I could be run over by a truck on the way home. It could happen at any point, right? You never know. So can you anchor a positive emotion with the person and acknowledge some way what the time meant to you, what the relationship means to you, and see what happens? Again, you leave people feeling good about their interaction with you, they're much more likely to want to have another interaction with you. So these are technically four ways to increase your likability, calling on my NLP experience. And it isn't about being manipulative. I want to be really clear about this. This is about showing up with kindness, curiosity, and being really present in the conversation. And I think where we are kind of in our world today, that is something that we would benefit from more of. And the way that you do that is you be the person who extends yourself. The meaning of your communication is based on the response you get. So now here's my question for you. What's the one strategy that we talked about, whether it's the acknowledging people in some way, whether it's the matching and mirroring in your rate of speech, whether it's the questions that you're going to ask or how you're going to leave the conversation? What's the one thing that you will do now that you've made it to the end of this episode? If you will answer that for yourself and actually take action on it, the benefits could be enormous. And if you feel so inclined to reach out and share with me, what is the one thing that you're going to do? Or if you do it and you have a success, or if you do it and it doesn't go well, I want to hear from you. If you're willing to share, I'm always delighted, truly delighted to hear from listeners and hear how a particular podcast episode impacted you or made some kind of impression in some way. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here. And if this episode is something that you think somebody else would benefit from, please share it with them. Although I do want to put this around this. Please do not share it with somebody and say, you could really use these communication skills, because that is not a rapport builder. If you want to share it with somebody, even if you think they could use some of these and they would benefit from them because they're lacking them, my suggestion is to share this in a way and say, I listened to this podcast episode and here's what I got out of it. I'm sharing it with you in case you would find interest in it. Don't say you really need these skills, because that is a rapport breaker, not a rapport builder. So again, thank you so much for listening. I wish you continued success in all your conversations, in all your relationships. Have a great rest of the day.